Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
The preceding discussions on understanding motivation had taken us to a point where we are looking at creating productive work environment, and I would like to carry the discussion on from there to say that understanding motivation by itself is of little use unless you know what to do with it. And to do something with it, the HR professional needs to take an inward look at the health of the employee management relationship and to refocus efforts on making it a priority. In other words, work performance is fine, but work performance itself is based on employee management relationship, and motivation is the key to employee management relationship. If the employee is not happy, if the employee is not willing to perform, if the employee is in no mood to integrate his own plans with the organizational plans, then we have a problem at hand. This is seen as an unglamorous task, but then HR very often has to deal with maintenance tasks, and maintenance tasks, be it with materials or with people, can be very demanding. But these unglamorous tasks are indeed the very core of motivating employees. The thought which needs to be underscored is that communication and transparency is the need of the hour, and creative practices like involving shop floor workers in wage benchmarking and engaging union employees productively in the planning processes of the institution is certainly a way forward, because it gives them a sense of belongingness, involvement, and if I might add, prior feeling of proprietorship. Companies must do the right thing and remove discrepancies that may exist within contract or permanent workers due to the short term efficiencies and the needs to drive long term effectiveness. In other words, it is a bad principle to have disparities within the system between contract workers and permanent workers. It creates two different parallel careers and it does not help effectiveness. In other words, therefore, motivation really leads to creating productive work environment all around, and to take it forward, we need to look at the symptoms of a motivated employee, and these symptoms become the end products of a targeted approach. The first symptom of a motivated employee is he is having a sense of pride in working for the institution in which he is working. It happens globally. If your child is admitted to a branded institution, if you have a job in a well branded institution, you generally let it be known, because that brand flakes off on you and you acquire a certain sense of pride in it. That itself is the origin of job satisfaction, the feeling that what you are doing is something worthwhile. On the other hand, if you do not have a pride in employment where you are, then you can hardly be expected to generate performance which is world class or broadly in the category of excellent. But not all tasks can be easy, not all tasks can be routine. Therefore, a motivated employee must have the inner propulsion to perform challenging tasks, and he would want to stay with the employer as long as he possibly can within the domains of his career aspirations. So, symptoms of a motivated employee broadly cover pride in work, pride with the employer, a certain feeling of job satisfaction, an opportunity which he seeks and gets to handle challenging tasks, and of course, a longevity in work. How do you help employees to be motivated? A complex question, not easily answered, but not a question which can be evaded either. So, you help an employee to be motivated by offering personal support to the subordinates. In other words, if you are putting him on to a task, you are also putting yourself to an obligation of helping meeting his personal needs. The personal needs of an employer today range from requiring proper transportation to work to having appropriate breaks at work, covering refreshments, occasion to keep in touch with his responsibilities outside work, and above all to attend to any emergencies or exigencies. Now, it is a difficult balance to handle, because personal support to subordinates can be stretched to a point where it becomes dysfunctional to the work on the job. So, ultimately the answer lies that, as it always does, in taking the medium path and a balanced approach to growth and operations in the organization, and keeping the employee interested in terms of his personal growth and in terms of his understanding on how he is going to gain by continued engagement with the organization. And finally, recognition and positive feedback on one's contribution is always of help, because it helps to position performance appropriately on the organizational map and creates visibility and contributes to formation of standards for working through. Now, motivating employees require some key HR initiatives. Here are some suggestions which you may wish to consider for the better understanding of a situation and ultimately carrying it to a job when you get one. Risking intelligently by reducing risks. There are two opinions: reduce risk when possible, and the second is exploit risk when it is appropriate. There are a lot of employees who find routine jobs demotivating, who dread the drudgery on the job. Now, such employees, or those in whom this is a driving motive, require to be put on jobs which are challenging, jobs which give them an opportunity to take creative risks, an opportunity to prove that they could do things beyond the ordinary and move the organization forward leveraging the options. Management usually tends to be more comfortable with reducing risks. Can't be grudged, because risk tolerance is an important judgmental parameter which an organization has to exercise. But if the purpose is to reduce risks, then it seems to me that it will be unusual for management to stick only to safe decisions. The management must have the capacity of trading off risks which are worth taking and with the support which it provides in taking those risks, and above all recognizing that faced with the risks, if the results are not constructive, if the results are not positive, it does not become a permanent slur on the career option of the individual. Now, companies hire former employees as they increase their staffing. This is a demographic feature which we have already noticed, only the character of re-employment is changing. The brilliance of selectively rehiring former employees is that organizations know exactly what they are getting. They have functioned in their culture and illustrated their talents and limitations. A great deal of the risk that is inherent in hiring processes is therefore eliminated. The sort of career which the organization offers post retirement is also a very important motivating feature, because it saves the employee from fizzling out in the last few years of his work orientation. Thus, it is that motivating employees, understanding motivation is a factor of the age of the employee, a factor of his socio-economic background, a factor of his job orientation, a factor of his financial needs, a factor of his expectations from the organization given the different points of life cycle which he may be at. A person in late 30s, early 40s is more likely to be worried about the educational opportunities of the children and the security of his household, rather than worrying about what he is going to take back after retirement, or on the contrary, where to get his child admitted. Put it simply and briefly, the organizations will find that people have different clusters of motivational requirements at different points of time in life, at different levels of the organization, and it may just as well be recognized that it is possible to get better performance out of people if the organization is offering certain support in seeing through these problems. Let me clarify with some illustration what exactly is meant. If, for example, the institution has a special relationship with a college, or for that matter even a school, in terms of admission of people who are employed, admission of wards of people who are employed in the organization, it is a great motivating factor. Certain degree of flexi time goes a long way in motivating people in giving them opportunities to go through fairly routine but essential parts of their daily chores, like payment of electricity bills, water bills, school fees, what have you. If one takes a very rigid view of the work situation, then it is possible to argue that this is none of the concern of the employer. Of course, it can be argued that it is none of the concern of the employer, but it is equally arguable that it is not possible to get any work done by anyone in a work situation if his mind is racing away elsewhere to look at the basic instruments of survival in the household. Now, these are considerations which may be built in by organization development specialists in the design of the organization, and there are organizations which have experimented in it. For example, CMC at one stage, C dot at another stage had gone in for flexi times, had gone in for providing support for people to travel to work in groups and with institutional support. Snacks had on the premises were always available and were always on the house. There was free coffee, free tea, and the institution gave a clear message: we care for you. Now, this message that you care for the employee is also reciprocated in many ways by the employee saying we care for the organization. But then the larger point to be made is the identification of the generational needs, and that you need to acknowledge that these needs are diverse and the expectations have to be met in different manners in a creative mode, is one of the key perspectives on motivation which needs to be recognized, because organizations need to take a relook at the total reward spectrum and the manner of administering it. In fact, one of the core perspectives of understanding motivation is that performance demands on people must be reasonable, and something which is very often missed. In fact, two things which are missed. Demands should not exceed the abilities of the person on whom the demands are made. Not everyone is capable of everything. Therefore, while making a demand, there should be some insights on the overall assessment of the individual. And the second is, nobody can be developed endlessly. There are limits to growth. So, motivation also becomes a factor of reasonableness. Motivation also becomes a factor of recognition of the realities of the person, realities of his situation, and above all, motivation comes out of a genuine demonstration that you understand what the problems of the individual are, you understand what his sources of satisfaction are, and you are going to do all that you can to meet it. So, unreasonable demands should be eschewed. It is not just a question of driving a person to the wall. A person may even respond and may be able to rise to the occasion of continuous unreasonable demand because he is made that way. But sooner or later, there will be results of the burnout. Sooner or later, this will result in low morale, and worst of all, it can lead to attrition. There is no point in losing a good employee by excessive demand. When organizations become known for being unreasonable, and the ability of having or hiring right people in future gets corroded. So, motivation has ramifications which need to be put to recognition and operation. That brings us really to a very important dimension of handling motivation, and the factor is of trust. You can't motivate people in an environment which is rooted in mistrust. It is important to understand that any occurrence of an industrial relations disturbance from a wider angled lens originates in distrust. So, there is a 180 degrees spectrum on motivation. At one end of the spectrum, a motivated employee is a huge achiever. At the other end of the spectrum, if the person is not motivated, is demotivated and is suffering from a feeling that he is not trusted, then that may have its own ramifications and very negative ones, and that it can result in industrial relations disturbances. The issue could have local and specific reasons, but none so strong as to cause a conflagration. So, to a certain extent, motivation is rooted in exogenous factors, which a person may not entirely mitigate in his capacity as a superior, but he can certainly flag it and make it easier to cope. More often than not, there are breakdowns of communication and trust deficit, and both breakdowns of communication and trust deficit tend to escalate and build upon themselves, and the consequences can never be adequately programmed. So, the best is to ensure that breakdown of communication does not take place, that trust deficit is suitably handled, and the individuals working for the organization feel supported and trusted. The prevailing socio-economic trends impact other economic triggers in a substantive way, and that is what was being indicated by the role of governance and environment in keeping motivation and morale at a particular level. So, a concomitant concern arises: how do you manage loyalty and productivity to make sure motivations are leveraged to achieve both? How do you motivate a person to be loyal, and how do you motivate a person to be productive? Now, there is a growing realization of this trend, where retention of an employee desirable as it may be from the familiarity angle and the loyalty angle, has a point of view where people are saying that if you have employee for long periods of work in the same company, that will impede his growth, and an impeded growth will lead to impaired motivation. Now, this is a catch 22. You motivate a person sufficiently and he sees his future in the organization and he wants to stay on. And at the same time, if by staying on his growth is slowed down, then it is counterproductive. So, where do you position your response? One possible answer may lie in applying a set of rules at the junior level, more modified rules at the senior mid level, and yet a different approach at the top level. At a pinch, it can be argued that about 70% of a workforce of any organization is at the junior and the mid senior level, and that is when the highest incidence of mobility takes place. That is the time when he will be driven by the hike in the salary, and empirical surveys have established that salaries which register upward graph of 25 to 40% have a huge pull factor. So, in a situation of cutthroat competition amongst elements, it does not matter whether one has jumped jobs frequently or not. What matters is how well you were able to contribute during the period you were at the organization. So, there is a need to change the lenses a little bit. There is a change towards making people long visioned. Now, how do you understand a people's problem? In an era of increased competition where margins are incessantly under pressure, business leaders do explore every opportunity of cost mitigation. The cost of living has gone up significantly, as have aspirations across workforce spectrum. Now, if the cost of living has gone up and aspirations of the across the workforce spectrum are spiraling, a major motivational factor is the kind of support which you provide. On these considerations, on what is the kind of support you can provide. Organizations are known to have allowed cooperatives for building housing colonies. Organizations are known to have provided support for health care post retirement. Organizations are known to have picked up costs at a discretionary level for extraordinary medical ailments. In other words, there is a role for hired care, if not necessarily compensation. So, one has to keep in mind that the focus on leadership to proactively listen and respond to workforce issues drives the latter more into the arms of resistance movements. Sometimes they take the form of the unions, but this is only when there is inadequate focus on leadership proactively listening. This may be true. Inadequate focus for the leaders to focus on proactively listening may lead to this kind of a shift. but the vice versa is not necessarily true. In some cases it works, in some cases it does not. Perhaps a good touchstone of sound managerial action is the moral content of it. The concern of employee branding has been raised, and that needs to be discussed in certain length. The primary reason why organizations are hesitant to invest in an employer branding campaign is the fact that there is no clear immediate ROI associated with it, but no institution can be developed if the focus is continuously on ROI. ROI comes in many ways, and the leadership of an organization should have the capacity to understand those many ways. If they do not, then what happens is that even learning and development efforts get impaired. In order to build a solid business case, an employer brand needs to communicate how it can constitute a source of competitive advantage for the business. Consulting companies are a good example, and their brand value, especially if they are of a multinational breed, is so high that people at times want to associate with them merely to prove that they were in that league. Then one can comment on this situation, but more to the purpose is to flag the need for employer branding. The successful companies pull the levers of competitive advantage through their employer branding campaign. It affects the attraction and retention of talent, ingraining organizational values, becoming an employer of choice, and in the ultimate analysis, becoming employer of choice is the final recognition which you can have both from your own employees and from the market in terms of your branded position. Therefore, the motivational interventions have many forms, one of which is the compensation policy. If you understand motivation, then the journey does not stop with the understanding, it has to be converted into managerial practices. And the managerial practices manifest themselves in various incarnations, and they do not only have to be proactive, they have to be substantive. Now, amongst the some substantive elements, compensation policy is an important criteria. It involves developing new ways to compensate and to motivate employees. The peace rating approach works, gain sharing, wage incentives, profit sharing, bonuses, and of course, variable pays. In fact, progressively companies are moving into a situation where the salary is broken into two components. One is the fixed pay, which you get irrespective. The second is the variable pay, which comes your way for many reasons, including your contribution to getting of assignments, boosting of markets, and promoting the interests of the organization, which can be documented in various manners. Competency based focusing on skills, knowledge, abilities and behavior is always a great incentive, and pull factor in getting performance out of the employees. Then there is a scalar dimension of motivation. The way you motivate the minimum wage employees will be different from the ways you motivate the middle level employees, will be different from the ways you motivate the top level employee. Let us talk of motivating the minimum wage employee. How do you do that? You do that by employee recognition. Many organizations today have a system of recognizing the employee of the week, the month, and creating celebrations around work achievements. You do it by praise, by naming people in a public forum, by flagging their contributions, by putting it in newsletters, and that in a unique way causes and supports empowerment, and that itself leads to a situation where the employee feels motivated, the employee feels empowered, even without getting the usual encouragement of the word, because recognition has been transferred into either the public domain or to material terms. Hence, what we are noticing today is a general widening and deepening of the tools of employee motivation, and some of them are known to work, some of them are not known to work, but only time will tell which of them will survive and which of them will not. For motivating diverse workforce, there are three elements suggested: flexibility, recognition of difference, and accommodating the difference. Appears fairly commonsensical, but is not so much of a common sense approach when it is put on the ground. Because how are you flexible in an environment where not everyone sees their job the same way? There is inherent flexibility. There is flexibility in the aggregation of the total set of perceptions. So, there are bound to be variances in the way the motivational factors work. There are bound to be differences in the way X will be motivated and the way Y will be motivated. So, how do you create a policy mix which is customized to an individual level? And that is one of the major challenges of understanding motivation, of operating motivation and dealing with motivation. So, no matter how much of attitudinal surveys have been done, no matter how effortful has it been to deal with larger organizational issues, the fact of the matter is that motivation cannot be customized, motivation cannot be put in neat boxes, and above all it cannot be patented. It is such a personalized situation that recognition of differences is the foundation stone of handling motivation. And no matter what route you take, one message which comes out clearly is you have to be accommodating. you have to be accommodating to cultural differences, you have to be accommodating to different temperaments, and unless your approach of empathy is not converted to understanding, which then leads to managerial action, handling motivation will be a challenge which will be as elusive as fascinating. Fortunately, motivation is a manageable phenomena. So, how do you motivate professionals and technical employees? The list here, like in anything else, can be endless, but we do not have to go chasing the endless, because then, and with due apologies for pun on the word, the chase itself becomes endless. But what are some of the motivating professional and technical employees acts which may at least merit a listing? One way of motivating people is new assignments. People get bored with the same task over and over again. Many like challenges. It stretches their capability to an outcome. Many believe that giving autonomy to the institution will cause a motivating situation. Sometimes it works, sometimes it does not work, because autonomy, be it industrial autonomy with reference to the Maharatnas or the Navaratnas, or there are huge categories of Ratnas with varying degrees of autonomy. But truth is, in the ultimate analysis, the will of the representative of the principal stakeholder does operate even in the Maharatna and the Navaratna companies, not to talk of many Ratnas. So, autonomy remains a desirable goal, but it is very difficult to feel it, touch it, to experience it, because those who control the purse strings also leave an impact on autonomy. You can motivate people by training and development opportunities. This works very well, because everyone likes to grow. Everyone likes to be skilled enough to be deemed a wanted situation, and of course, recognition works. Enough has been said on that, not to need repetition, but the fact of the matter is that with recognition, if some attention can be made to non-work life, and as I have been indicating earlier in my remarks, simplify it through organizational intervention, and I talked of admission, I talked of public utility, fees, payments and the rest of it. Not very complicated to operate, but yes, rare to find. One wonders why these simple routes to motivation are not adopted by work organizations, because that is really what would make them successful. Negating the negative motivation is also an important dimension. Employee relationships have come to a tipping point in India, essentially because negative motivation is very high. Mercifully, this is not a universal phenomena. Be that as it may, the violent means have to be eschewed. What happened in Maruti not so long ago in terms of what led to the butchering of a general manager in a plant situation clearly cannot be a matter of anything but awkwardness to all involved, but we must focus on fundamental pillars of creating high performing organizations, for which trust and mutual respect is one of the major building blocks. As usual, more easily said then followed, but then stating the ideal is often a desirable process because it keeps the issue alive. Companies by and large make every effort to be compliant and stick to both the letter and the spirit of the law, but that by itself may not be a sufficiently motivating factor. One has to provide, besides fair employment proposition, a constructive supportive environment, and the managerial art lies in reading the unstated, identifying the intangible and building upon that. Unethically motivated external influences obviously have to be kept at bay and organizations insulated from such influences. Processes like wage negotiation need to be relooked through different lenses. So, that brings us to employee motivation and effective goal setting. Reading through this may be illuminating. There are keywords, but I will visit it after you have read it. This has to be specific, which means measurable change within a time period. This has to be relevant within employees' control and responsibilities. It has to be challenging in terms of raising the level of effort. It has to be accepted by way of commitment. It has to be participative sometimes, because it would improve acceptance and goal quality, and obviously there has to be a feedback, a predictable loop with predictable phases. Job enrichment and job design are at times hugely useful in adding to motivation. You will find that job redesign as a tool tends to surface over and over again in making an organization a better place, getting better results, but going beyond them both, keeping an organization at a level of synergy with the environment. And you will find that it will surface again when we talk of, as we are going to do shortly, elements of human resources planning. How do you plan? But that is a separate issue, and we will be dwelling upon various components of human resources plan by going through the various segments of human resources manifestation in an organization, as we have discussed in this module, and to see how the planning processes there work. But that was a look ahead when we came against the suggestion that job redesign is a potent tool of motivating employees and enriching the jobs. With that, we find that there are 5 fundamental ways of motivating subordinates, which again are not the only ways, but somewhere a wrapping has to be done, so that there are certain takeaways, certain seedbed thoughts with which one has to organize one's intervention strategies. For our purposes of wrapping up, I would say challenging the process is a fundamental way of motivating subordinates. Inspiring a shared vision is another. Enabling others to act is a third. Modeling the way is a fourth. And above all, encouraging from the heart, getting emotional involvement certainly helps in understanding motivation, moving people, because at the end of the day, employees, like human beings, are complex entities, and you have to touch them where it really feels good to be touched. Thank you for now.